All right, good morning, folks. It is 11 o'clock and we have a big agenda, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. All right, good morning. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order of the Assembly Committee on Housing and Homelessness. It is Wednesday, April 19th. We are noticed today from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Let's go ahead and start with introductions, starting with Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson.
Joey Sweet.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Daniel Volland.
Felix Rivera. And then on the phone, we have Assemblymember Dern.
Smith Dern.
Great, thank you. And then Assemblymember Quinn Davidson.
Yep, good morning, everyone.
All right, good morning. And then just want to note for the record that Mr. Cross is excused for this meeting. All right, so we have two people signed up for initial audience participation, Mr. Oliva and then a representative from Cook Inlet Tribal Council. You will each have 3 minutes and I'll manage the timer. So Mr. Oliva, if you can come on up, we will get you a microphone. So come on up, Mr. Oliva. And then also want to note for the record that Mr. Solt is excused. Welcome.
Felix, let me set my clock because I can't see your clock, correct? Okay. And I've never been known to go over 3 minutes, but
Never,
hey.
ever.
Okay, good morning. My name is Ron Oliva. I'm adjacent to the Brother Francis shelter. I want to let you know my land hasn't been sold as stated in a press release. It's still for sale. I'm here for two reasons. One, to let you know that I think you should entertain the idea of the North Campus of the former ML&P area as a homeless complex, which could handle a large volume of homeless people from a campsite to all the way to a job training center. And one of the legs of the presentation of the Homeless Coalition was a need for training. The Hope Center does a good job, but that campus could go everywhere from doggy daycare for therapy animals to tiny home building to dormitories. It's a great facility and it should be entertained because they are selling it. And spreading it across the city isn't the best idea. The second thing that's real important is shelter licensing has no bite. A marijuana license, a liquor license, if you violate it, you get pulled. If there's licensing, there has to be consequences outside of the slap on the hands. We'll give you 90 days to correct it. That's not going to work. And you got to reduce the population, hit them in their pocketbooks, and make sure they respect the neighborhood. And the memorandums of agreement and understanding are necessary, but they're weak. And any community council that signs a good neighbor policy, it has to have bite and consequences. For instance, the navigation center came in without any input from the community. And truly, no one told me it was going in. Now you got 4 foot of snow on Carlick Street on the sidewalk, and you got people, clients going there in wheelchairs and walkers. They killed 2 people at that site with cars. And unfortunately, I report this, and you would think it would be the responsibility of the director of the navigation center or the shelter to realize that they have to cross a truck route and there's no crosswalks. This was the wrong location, but you have to adjust. And the way to do that is, number one, make it safe access by removing that snow. I got 3 seconds. I want you to be safe and try to get me my money.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? You should all have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva. I don't see any. So I'm going to go ahead and invite up a representative from Cook Inlet Tribal Council. Yes, we can. So if there's a representative from CITC on the phone, it is *6, I believe, to unmute yourself. If you
Okay.
could, great. If you can go ahead and introduce
Yes.
yourself, and then I will put on the timer for 3 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Leanne Cooper Garrick, and I serve as the COO at Cook Inlet Tribal Council. We're a tribal social services nonprofit organization serving Alaska Native and American Indian individuals and families residing in Anchorage and the 8 tribes that comprise the Cook Inlet region. I'll keep my comments short today because we're very excited to hear more about the demobilization plan and hoping that includes more on the 2 task force initiatives introduced last night. I'm presenting on behalf of CITC to strongly advocate for a reconsideration of the 4:30 closure of the Sullivan Arena. I understand this is a unanimous vote by the Assembly, but it is a surprising and quite frankly disappointing outcome. Keeping this facility open a little bit longer is critical given the current cold temperatures, the lack of a comprehensive support plan for the most vulnerable individuals, and the absence of a timeline to provide integrated services across the community. The task force initiative resolutions passed last night are very compelling, but won't prove to be effective if there's no longer a place for where to serve individuals and do not include the voices of those providing those services. Lastly, I strongly encourage this committee to start planning now for next fall and winter. We have spent more time looking at options than implementing solutions this year, and people experiencing homelessness need to have year-round shelter solutions in place. Thank you for the time, and we look forward to the discussion today.
Great, thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Since you jumped in, I have to ask, what is your plan for participating in the demobilization effort? Not you personally, but CITC.
I'm so glad that you asked. We actually have been working really closely with our partner social service organizations across the city to figure out where we all fit in. CITC does not directly have homeless services, but we provide a multitude of supportive services, and we have leadership staff there in the room today for us to be able to serve folks as they come in to see us. We do a little bit of the outreach. We in the most part, partner with folks that are across the organization to figure out funding to be able to support them. We do food, we do rental assistance, help folks be able to get jobs, all of those pieces. Our team was actually one of the first when the pandemic happened and everybody moved into the Sullivan Arena. We were one of the first groups to set up a table and be able to serve folks with resources.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so as usual, I will do my best to make space for folks who want to speak during final audience participation. But we have a big agenda, which gets me to the next remark. So we have a lot on our agenda today, and I'm going to ask for some flexibility from the members so I can get to the critical topics that we have before us. We'll try and get through as much of our agenda as possible, but I think no matter what, we will be ending right around 12:30 or 12:40. There's another event shortly after this that we need to be getting ready for. So with that, our first item under unfinished business, we're just going to go straight to the meat of it, which is the continued discussion on implementation of AR 2023-127 demobilization plan. So last week, we went through a team exercise to vet and decide paths forward on the various planks of the demobilization plan. We're going to finish that work today. So same process as last time, discussion, go, no go, shelve, table, whatever term you want to use on that, requests for information, timeline, and leads. So the sections that we have left are, there's a couple additional items in section 3 to go through of the demobilization plan, specifically the modular buildings and the ASD relocatables. And then on section 8, even though we did pass the resolution yesterday creating the complex behavioral health needs task force, I at least do want to have a discussion because we haven't been able to talk about that as a committee. So just get some initial thoughts from members here on that particular task force. But before we get into any of those sections, we have a couple folks who wanted to speak to us about section 1 of the resolution dealing with the Sullivan Arena closure on April 30th. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the coalition to please join us as well, because I know you wanted to speak to that. Thank you. So we have both RRS and ACEH, the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, who wanted to share some separate recommendations. So we're going to go ahead and start with RRS, and then we'll go to ACEH.
Thank you. Through the chair, my name is Kathleen McLaughlin. I'm a principal at Restorative and Reentry Services who are operating under a grant until April 30 in order to help advise with respect to operations of the Sullivan and the demobilization. On Monday, we presented our weekly report. It was number 4 of what will be 5. And we have continued to recommend that the Sullivan Arena be held open for those most at risk after April 30th. Through a expedited review of the individuals currently using the Sullivan, we determined approximately 174 people were high-risk individuals that should not be put onto the streets on April 30th. That plan we continue to support. I should say, since we last met last week, we have had RS, who is Monica Gross, and myself, have gone through community meetings, community provider meetings, and the choices are simple. Number 1 is hard close April 30th, and we all do the best we can. Number 2 is a step down for May. And number 3, which is the one that's been advocated for by community members and community providers, is to keep the Sullivan open until there is another alternative low barrier shelter. As far as RRS, we have, I think everyone has gotten a report. It's called the second report out. I mailed it last night. If anyone has any questions, I would encourage anyone to ask specific questions. I think I would like to respond to anything at this point that would be important for your decision making. Oh, I have one more thing to add. Under 16.120, an emergency is invoked if the temperature is below 45 degrees ambient temperature. And the other thing that I realized when I was reading the code is that the administration can invoke an emergency and keep the shelter open for 150 or less. It is my understanding that the reason the closure is going to happen on April 30th is it's a funding issue and a contract ending issue with the current operator. I just wanted to throw those facts out for your consideration.
Thank you. I think there's more to it than just those couple of things, but thanks.
Oh, yes.
All right. So any questions for RRS? And we did get those documents. I think it was a little bit late breaking, but hopefully folks had a chance to review those. I'll go ahead and start us with a question. So 174 high risk. Can you, I think we'll get into this a little bit more later when ACEH talks, but I want to hear your perspective about how would you define that 174 high risk? Like, what are the categories within that 174?
Through the chair, we have a triage analysis that was attached that lays it out. The 174 is comprised of individuals with significant physical disabilities, wheelchairs, canes, walkers, inability to walk for long periods of time. It also includes people with significant and severe mental health issues. and it also includes significant and severe issues with SUD, with substance use disorders. But we're talking about significant. We're not talking about people that can manage themselves. These are people that cannot manage themselves in the community without supports.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Kathleen. I am aware of the what's called the former Sockeye Inn, which is a complex care shelter that sounds like I believe it serves kind of a similar or the same population that you're describing. I know that was brought online, I believe, last year. Are you aware? I would guess that it's full, but are you aware of the current occupancy and if and how long the waiting list is, if there is one?
Yes, through the chair. It is full. There's a 47 person wait list. And with respect to all of the individuals that I have talked about that would be able to be at Sockeye, they have been put on the wait list. I should also say we are also struggling with individuals that do not have good ADLs, ability to do daily living, and those individuals don't qualify for Sockeye because they are too ill.
Yeah, thank you. So just to follow up, so it sounds like there is certainly significant need in the community for that type of service. And right now we just don't have enough beds by far.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thanks. And I think just as I understand it, just to add another point of context. So yes, 47 person wait list, and it also takes about 6 to 12 months to exit the Sockeye. Complex care. So that's just, I think, another factor to consider. All right, I'm not seeing any other. Okay, go ahead, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the update, Ms. McLaughlin, and for the information. I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about the level of support needed for some of these individuals? I know you mentioned there are folks with significant physical disabilities. And the reason why I'm asking is, one, have all the providers been invited to come to the Sullivan, and are they fully engaged? And then two, is there an opportunity for other groups, whether it's churches or medical organizations, I don't know, to step in and provide some temporary shelter and support? But again, I don't have a clear idea of the level of support needed for folks in those groups. And if you could speak to that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Through the chair, I don't want to advertise myself as a medical specialist, but what I can say is when you see something, you know something. What I mean by that is there are people that have been chronically homeless or on the streets for so long with medical disabilities that they are not able to function outside of a controlled environment, such as a low barrier shelter. So a low barrier shelter, in my mind, or a place to rest is important for our community to have in order for these individuals to at least have some safety net. Second, there has been a call out to all of the providers who received HFC funding to see how many beds there are available. And there are some beds available. The tricky part is if you are not work ready or if you are not completely sober, these beds are not being offered to this population. So even though we have open beds, it is not for the population that we are speaking about, which is the 174.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move us on because I think this next part of the conversation will be complimentary. So thank you so much, Ms. McLaughlin, to the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. And as I understand it, you have two separate recommendations to speak to us about.
Thank you. So something we've been doing for a while now, and it's really born out of the complex care shelter, is something we call ADRC, case conferencing. So it's our recommendation in coordination with Kathleen Henning and the health department to see if ADRC can't go in and do person-centered intakes for those who have identified physical disabilities. That person-centered intake is an opportunity to see if someone might qualify for the Alaskans Living Independent Medicaid waiver, which usually means they meet an assisted living facility level of care. Once that intake is done, where the coalition braids in is we bring together providers, ADRC, and we case conference, which is we talk about what the options are available for that person, maybe now, medium term, long term. We propose trying to expedite, we think about 62 of those intakes, 50 at the Sullivan and 12 at the Aviator, conducting that case conferencing and being able to kind of do a triage report for you all so you can make decisions on maybe what that looks like by Monday, knowing that you all have a meeting the following Tuesday. Additionally, we think that even if it may not inform keeping a facility open or opening another facility, it will also inform our outreach efforts for those who are highly vulnerable. So we think this is a good idea. We have been talking with the health department about the ability to utilize ADRC in this way. And it should provide us more information. It would not address the individuals with necessarily serious substance misuse issues or individuals with complex behavioral health needs. Additionally, a couple of things that I think are really important to note. There are 47 individuals on the complex care waiting list. One of the results of this particular case conferencing may be to add more people to the complex care waiting list. I think we've probably captured everyone at the Sullivan Arena in particular, maybe, but it seems like we find more people each day that look like they might qualify.
So I need to make a correction. David Rittenberg just notified me that the wait list at the complex care is 64, not 47.
Probably the ones we've put on in the last couple of weeks while we've been there. So that is our recommendation to get a better sense of who is actually highly vulnerable, both at the Aviator and the Sullivan Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks. So is it fair to think that how does someone get on the list for the complex care? What is the criterion?
So if you want Mr. Rittenberg to come up and talk, I mean, he works for Catholic Social Services, but for the most part, they have a medical need, either chronic or a mobility issue. They have to be able to take care of their own activities of daily living. There is a screen for behavioral health issues that would impede the ability to basically take care of yourself. And then they have some internal elevations once you're on the wait list that they kind of triage based on need.
And so do we know of that 64? Probably we don't at this point because we don't have the list, but who is in the Sullivan or not, or in the Aviator or not, or the other complex? Yeah.
So we probably could find that out. I know personally, I've put 10 people on the wait list in the last 2 weeks, I believe.
Out of Sullivan.
Out of the Sullivan.
Right. And so it seems like maybe there's some overlap then between the 50 or 60 that ADRC might be able to review and this list.
Yes, and it would likely give us better information about their needs, which would inform possibly the complex care wait list as well. Because right now, when I interview someone and put them on that wait list, I'm talking with them, I'm getting their self-reports, and I'm making a bit of a judgment call. This would be this person-centered intake. Also, it gets the ball rolling if they're likely to qualify for the Medicaid waiver, which is really what drives those lengths of stays. We've been trying to advocate with Senior and Disability Services to expedite these folks. We're not getting any traction there. I understand everyone, excuse me, seeking the waiver is someone in need, but it takes a long time to process through that in order to be able to possibly access like an assisted living facility.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, not seeing anyone else. I will, before we get to your second recommendation, I will ask the administration just your general thoughts.
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, we've been working closely with the coalition, and we are in agreement. The health department is advocating for ADRC to go in. We know that this population is not going to fare well outside, and so we're advocating for that group. In our numbers, we conferred our numbers, and 62, rough give or take, is that number. So,
Is there a representative from ADRC here who can speak?
Through the chair, no, there is not. But if you need a email follow-up or something, I can get that for you.
Thank you. All right. I forgot to do this earlier. Just want to note for the record that Mr. Cross has been here for about 5 minutes or so. All right. Not seeing any other questions about the ADRC effort. Looking forward to hopefully on Monday. Oh, Mr. Volan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. So timeline wise, because I think a conversation that we're going to be having here is, do we extend the Sullivan Arena for a limited duration for a limited population? So getting the Medicaid waivers, getting people actually connected to assisted living. Are we talking a month? Are we talking 6 months? What are we talking?
You're talking a while. You're talking pretty much what we see kind of at complex care, right? So I would say having that information, a kind of a better sense of who has these needs and what options may be available going through this case conferencing, then you can make a choice, a policy decision about what your aims are. Is it to give time for folks with mobility issues to have less snow to contend with? Is it that you're looking for a place for them to go, or so that they only transfer from a sheltered location to a sheltered location? We could give you some best estimates, but there's not going to be a quick solution to this, likely. One more thing from Ms. Ware.
So Taria Ware with the Anchorage Coalition in Homelessness. I think the reality here, and we want to be based on reality, is that even when we do the case conferencing and we have everybody in the room, those that move forward not only need case managers, they need care coordinators, and care coordinators can take 2 weeks to 30 days. They need another assessment at the state level, which is another 30 days. There is a timeline for this process that is none of it is quick. And then we also need the buy-in from the person experiencing homelessness that is what they want to do. Sometimes it is, I want to live independently, and then we need to find an apartment that is accessible and affordable for them, and then layer on the services. And other times it is, we need to find an assisted living home for them. And then, have they been to assisted living homes before? Are they on a banned list? Where can they go? Is it somewhere that and then they have a choice of, right, what home? And it's home interviews. I hope that there's home interviews, and seeing and making sure that they're comfortable so they have a long-term stay. So the population we are talking about, it is usually what we put on our little PDF, a 6 to 18 month time frame. That is the time.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. One additional question. So in addition to working with the ADRC at the city level, is the coalition also working with state Division of Senior Disability Services and looking at general relief?
Yes, we are. And we will actually be presenting to their group of care coordinators as well to elevate the need for care coordination for this particular population, because they have a hard time obtaining an independent care coordinator. But general relief is not going to be enough to secure housing, particularly in an assisted living home. Very few assisted living homes will accept general relief, even pending a Medicaid waiver right now.
Thanks. And I got ahead of myself. Can you remind the public what general relief is and how it's separate from Medicaid?
It's basically emergency funding for people who are likely to have a disability that affects them and prevents them from working, while we look at some other way in order to support them, such as a Medicaid waiver. It's not very much money. It could be paired in some instances with emergency rental assistance, where the emergency rental assistance only pays for the housing portion of an assisted living facility. But we haven't found a lot of traction with that yet because it's so new to assisted living facilities. They really want someone who's on a waiver. Thanks.
Mr. Constant?
Thanks. Two things. One, ADRC is the municipality's Aging and Disability Resource Center. For folks who aren't aware, acronyms are the anathema to open government. And, something that's missing from our approach, and I know some people think this is a fool's errand, but I think we should be considering drafting a resolution that we address to the governor, the legislature, the health department director at the state, praying for relief in a very broad and specific way, because we can't do this alone. And as we have these conversations about the endlessly expanding demand, we need help. And so I think I would like us to contemplate some kind of prayer for relief from the state in the form of a resolution.
Thanks. Yeah, that's, I think, certainly something we can consider. I think aside from that, the Complex Behavioral Health Needs Task Force will also be sending some recommendations to the state and the legislature, governor, and state agencies, but no reason that we can't get ahead of the ball on that as well. Okay, not seeing, yeah, Ms. LaFrance.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add on to what Mr. Constant said. And as I mentioned yesterday, when we took up the task force resolution regarding complex behavioral health needs, I think it's pretty clear that the need in our community has well exceeded the resources and ability of our local government to respond, and in fact is outside the jurisdiction, largely, I mean, in terms of behavioral health. And I don't know what the role of some of these, state agencies, including API, is, but I am 100% on board on some kind of effort of outreach to the state, including legislators as well, because frankly, I think this is an emergency situation, and some kind of action and help from the state immediately is required. So thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, not seeing anyone else, then your second recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now, April 30th is a Sunday. That's a little problematic because services aren't typically available on Sundays. And Sunday is just a really hard time to have any kind of support for people if they are going to be moving. So it's our recommendation that if you guys can make it possible for the Sullivan to stay open till noon on Monday, May 1st. We hope to support that in a couple of ways. One is we will be doing a pop-up at the Sullivan Arena in the parking lot on the 26th to help make sure folks have some basic necessities if they're going to move to an unsheltered status. Two, we are publicizing where we are popping up for the remainder of May so that folks can start to figure out a plan to meet some of their needs. As we've talked about before, our contact-driven outreach deals with a lot of basic life necessities. We're working with our partners on food and water plans, working closely with AHD about what that last week might look like at the Sullivan if we're able to secure some bus passes so people can move around, as well as making sure that there is a meal on the last day and hopefully a sack lunch so that as people are ready to go, they can go. These are some lessons learned from last time and really being prepared for folks to probably start to move out anytime after, as we kind of move towards that end. But that's why we're going to pop up on the 26th. So if we could get to Monday, that would be a lot more helpful so that we would have staff to support and make sure that we can ensure as smooth a transition as possible.
Thanks. Go ahead if you want.
I was just reminded buses run on a very limited number of hours on Sunday as well.
Thanks. All right. So thanks. So I have myself in the queue, and I think just as a so there are two separate lanes of conversations happening, right? There's for a limited number, a limited population, do we continue usage of the Sullivan? And then there's for the entire population, can we extend for at least a day so that we can maybe make sure things are in place to make the transition as easy as possible. So I guess my question to the administration is, what would that require? Because the contract ends on April 30th, right?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, it would require a contract amendment to be approved. I I believe I've had this conversation with municipal attorney and Hauser on the liability side, and so she can speak to that, but it would require a contract extension even for 12 hours.
Got it. All right. So all of those things will likely be before us on Tuesday, whatever decisions that we decide to make as a body. So I know there's been a lot of apprehension about late on the table items, but likely that's what these all are going to be. So be prepared, not looking at any nameplates. Any questions on the second recommendation from ACH? All right, not seeing any. Then thank you both. Yeah. All right, so then we're going to go ahead and move back to the demobilization plan discussion and get to section 3, which is and we're going to have, per the guidance that I received at the last Special Housing and Homelessness Committee, we're taking section 3 in bites and pieces of it. So we did talk about the pallet shelters, which I have to keep saying this. Pallet Shelters is a company. It's a specific type of facility. So if you want to know what pallet shelters actually are, just please Google pallet shelters. There were 2 other parts of that section which we need to go through each separately. So one is modular buildings, and then as a sort of a general concept. And then the third is ASD relocatables. With regard to modular buildings, does the administration have any information to share on that?
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, I will say specifically, we've been focused on pallet shelters. Our communications with them, we've been working pretty rapidly, full steam ahead with planning, zoning, trying to determine a location with the coalition, with RRS. All partners are working towards it. We seem to be in a good posture if it's the will of the city, to move them up here and acquire them and get them fit into our city zoning legally.
Thank you. All right. So then is there any discussion on modular buildings before I ask for a recommendation? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Voland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just maybe on timeline, if you're having those conversations with, I assume, the planning department and building, is there going to be an ordinance coming before us or changes that we need to make?
Through the chair, we've been working with Mr. Lance Wilbur Ross. We'll figure out who else is on this convo, but Greg Soule with planning and zoning, and they have been meeting with Pallet to figure out fire, snow load, all that fun stuff. And then they're going to be bringing forward code recommendations for changes if they're needed. And so those initial conversations are still happening, but they are happening.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, thank you. Simultaneously, and that's currently where I'm at right now, meeting with the Anchorage home builders. And then I had a meeting earlier today with some surveyors and land developers, identifying the code provisions and land use restrictions that make for modular construction, high density, non-traditional construction difficult to do an anchor. And so I have something I'm working on. It might be more of an omnibus that'll tackle multiple zoning and land use issues, both in Title 23 and Title 21. But I'll probably be ready to give you a presentation here in about another week or so on the efforts we've made forward towards those efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thanks. This is probably me just catching up, obviously, because I'm new. When and how did the conversation start with Pallet Shelter? Like, which was it the city who reached out first, or was it the vendor who reached out first?
Neither. It was actually an individual community member who reached out and said, you should think about this.
Okay. I guess I just want to flag, I'm not opposed to this idea. And I think looking at modular construction generally is a really good idea. There's a lot of innovation in that field. I guess I would just note, it'd be nice to also look at housing and more permanent structures and not just small shelters where folks would not have any kind of lease or longer term arrangement. And also just want to be wary of, making sure that we're using our procurement process properly and not just pursuing agreements with one vendor without due diligence. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that comment, and she's absolutely right. We're also working very hard to modify land use and zoning for what is now considered commercial construction, which is triplexes, fourplexes, and larger. And those don't necessarily have to be apartment style. They may be multiple individual units, as well as planned unit developments, which are PUDs, which are a more compact version of a residential development. So yes, just know that we are working voraciously on that angle as well. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, not seeing anyone else in for discussion. So just like last time, what I'm going to ask is that we go round table, and I want everyone to give me your preference on go, no go, shelf, table, and then I will ask for a motion for a recommendation from the members of the committee. But I do want to first hear from everyone, committee member or not, at the table. So I'll go ahead and start, and we can keep this quick, or you can expound if you want. So for me, for modular, yeah, I'm good with the go. I don't really have any qualifiers on that. Mr. Constant?
I think with the broader definition of modular, I'm okay with the conversation.
Go.
I shared my thoughts already, but I'm open to this discussion, so go.
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 Oh, go.
Wonderful. Okay, and then folks on the phone. All right, I got a text go from Mr. Cross. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yep, I agree. Sounds good to into.
Okay, great. So then we're going to go ahead and go through the rest of the process now that actually, I need a recommendation, actually. So can I get a motion from one of the committee members to make a recommendation that basically we move forward with the exploration of this idea as a go? So if someone can make that recommendation, or rather motion. Any of the committee members can.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, so then that motion is approved. So now we will go through the rest. Aside from the discussion that we've had so far, are there any additional requests for information that folks have specific to this modular building idea? And my back is turned, so I'll ask the vice chair if there are people who want to get in the queue to manage that.
Ms. Dern?
Thank you. I know we talked about 30 units being available right away. I'm wondering.
That was specific for pallet shelters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So in general, how many units are we looking at being available right away? And then I guess maybe a timeline for how many units we'd be able to add. I just have no sense of how much housing this will be able to accommodate over time. Thanks.
Thanks.
Mr. Volland?
So we kind of addressed this a little bit with the Dignity Village model, but I guess I would just say, what resources do we also need on site? Restrooms, showers, et cetera, to really create a functional community.
I'm going to volunteer up geographic distribution.
God, this thing smells.
Ms. Brawley?
I'll wait for Felix to finish writing.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think my questions, just building on what I said before, would be parameters for stay. I mean, so when you talk about housing, you're looking at a lease, which gives you legal right to that property for a certain amount of time, also obligations to maintain it, things like that. So I understand shelter is different. So I just wonder what would be general parameters for stay here. I mean, hearing also that a lot of folks need a while to stay. And so would they be kicked out arbitrarily after 30 days? Those kind of questions.
If I might, just also parameters and terms. I think legally, specifically are terms.
All right. Not seeing any other requests for information. Then we'll move on to timeline. And really, all of these things are fluid and moving, but a lot of this work outside of the code changes, I think, are going to be driven by the Sanctioned Camp Task Force, which, again, to repeat what I said at the assembly meeting yesterday, sanctioned camps, I'm using it as an umbrella term to really encompass a lot of these different ideas. So with that, the section 7, which is the sanctioned camp, we did decide, the reports in July. So that's when we're going to be getting that report. Any other timeline issues that we want to talk about for that? Okay, then lead for the administration, and this was palette, and then this one's modular. All right, so for the admin, who will be taking lead?
Through the chair. I'll take lead.
All right. And then, if I may be so bold, Mr. Cross, will you be taking lead? Uh-oh. Mr. Cross?
Did we lose you, Mr. Cross?
Well, I'm going to just put him down. All right. Okay, one down. Next one is the Anchorage School District relocatables. So first we'll start with the administration. If you have any additional information to present on that idea.
Through the chair to Mr. Rivera, I do not have an update. We have not been in communication with ASD. Our focus lately has been with Palette, but I can open those conversations again.
I had a conversation with the school board president, I think about 3 weeks ago, and I was told that those buildings are still available. They haven't gone anywhere. They do still face some challenges in regard to access, egress, and fire safety.
Thanks for that update. Any questions, discussion before we move on? Yeah, Ms. Stern?
Thank you. Can Mr. Cross, or I'm sorry, Mr. Constant, could you remind me how many of these relocatables there are?
I don't recall the specific number, but there's quite a few of them. But I think we were limited by which ones we could choose because of a size constraint. So it had to be the larger ones. And I think we had to put in another door because, again, they're not made for residential sleeping use. And so that use is substantially different. But I don't have the number, but it's practically speaking, there could be an opportunity for a number of people.
And have there been any conversations with community organizations on doing that work, like Habitat for Humanity or any of the other groups that might be out there that could do that work for us as part of their mission or put it onto their calendar for,
I think the answer to that question depends on the plan for implementation, but I think we have not seen a lack of interest in the community to support these efforts, though most of these organizations need to be paid. So it's usually not quite a zero-sum process. But we also have relationships with the carpenters and their training programs, and there are a number of different ways to approach it, but we have to get to the point where there's some consensus around the idea before investing too much. And where it stopped, I believe, was around the safety.
Thanks. And apologies. I've been meaning to do this for a while, but have been forgetting. Apologies that we don't have enough chairs in the room. And I know I see a lot of folks standing or sitting. As I've repeatedly said, the decision was made to move, based on a few recommendations, to move this meeting into 155 rather than have it at the chambers. And And now we have an overflowing room, so my apologies. Any other discussion on this idea of the ASD relocatables? Yes, go ahead.
Through the chair, I have been in many relocatables and I've never seen any without two doors. They had to have them for the kids, an emergency exit. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, through the chair to Ms. Branga, there are some relocatables that have just one entry point. They do have like windows, so to speak, but our code requires a secondary exit that I believe is ADA compliant, and also fire suppression. Because none of these are sprinklered, we would need to either have fire watch or a fire suppression system installed. So those are the two major barriers. And to speak to Ms. Dern's point, there was 56 that were offered to us, and they were in a wide array of sizes, and some had two doors, and yeah, and they were all over the city. So.
All right. Don't see any other discussion. All right, so then we'll go ahead and move on to the round table for the go, no go shelf table. I'm not going to start this one. So I will actually turn over then to Miss Brawley, if you want to start the round table on this one. And you weren't here for the last time we did this, so you don't have to do a simple go or no go or shelf or table. You can add qualifiers if you want to that.
Thanks. I guess similar to before, I might have questions about, who would be in these for how long and those kinds of, those same questions would apply. But I am open to this idea, especially because they already exist here. So that would be a go.
Thanks. Then I'm going to go ahead and come back to Mr. Constant then, if you're ready.
Yeah, I think that there will be some folks who ask, well, why didn't you do this a year ago? And there were many conversations a year ago, and I think that there was a lot less good faith operating between the branches than there is today. And so I'm interested in hearing this conversation. I think we have to be careful because a number of these modules are not in good shape. They're old. And so it's not like all of them are available or all of them are good. And so I think we should exercise great care in taking on the liability of very old structures when we're going to use them for human habitation. And so, yes, go with some very strong cautions towards the safety of the people in them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. On sort of the geographic distribution and locations for these, something that I think would be an interesting concept to think about, and I actually had this conversation with Kathleen. I hope it's okay that I'm saying this because I thought it was an interesting idea would be to, if it's tiny homes or the ASD modular units, to maybe stage them in immediate proximity to housing that's going to come online. So potentially the parking lot of the Barrett Inn, maybe that could be a waiting area for them while they're waiting to be placed more full-time in a unit or something. So I don't know. I think they could be used for transition into a longer term, more stable situation.
Go. And I actually thought this one was still being explored based on the work sessions we had and the issues that were identified. I think anything is a potential and we should explore, broadly. I will say that at some point, I think there might need to be a conversation about resource prioritization because obviously there are limits to staff and time. Thanks.
And money.
Well, yeah, that's for us. Oh. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I would echo Mr. Constant's concerns about safety, but with that said, if we're looking at code variances and code changes for other housing, I think that we should consider how that might apply here, assuming that the structures are sound. And I think 56 leaves us with a lot to have to contend with in terms of inspections and design, and then trying to coordinate with various organizations to refab and move. And so I recognize, even though this is a go for me, that it's asking a lot, but I don't think that we should turn away any resources at this point.
I'm going to say go with some of the same somewhat reservations that have previously been mentioned, but overall, go.
Well, we had initial discussions at the Community and Economic Development Committee within the last year about the relocatables. And there still are some questions that need to be answered. But I believe that before we start importing buildings from outside, we need to look at these first and see if it would be actually quicker or less expensive or both to utilize them. So yeah, I'm a go on that one. Thank you.
I'm a go, and I echo what Pete says is anytime we can utilize a building that's already here rather than ordering new ones and bringing them in, I'm very supportive of that.
Thank you. All right. So for me, yeah, I'll go ahead and echo my colleagues with a go, concerned about safety. And, I think at some point, the task forces and others will do a lot of exploration. And in the end, they will bring code changes, funding requests to us. And in the end, we're going to have to make those decisions on where we prioritize our funding because, as I've tried to say, we don't have endless funding, right? Okay. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Constant to assist with a recommendation.
So the recommendation would
Oh,
be,
my apologies. I forgot the folks on the phone. My bad. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, I'm a go for those. I'm getting some echo. If you guys would turn your mics off. Thank you. And it's real easy. If someone could just tell me where the relocatables are located, I'm happy to go drive and take a look at them. They actually sell the pallet shelters out in Wasilla. There's a couple distributors of them. They use them as emergency shelters for cabins. And so I think if we have any questions, it would be real easy to take a day and go drive and examine them. And I think we get a lot of answers just with a physical and visual examination. So I'm a go. Thank you.
Through the chair to Mr. Cross, yes, I will get with ASD and figure out where these relocatables are, and I will get you a list of those.
Thanks. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
I have no additional comments. All sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Sorry, back to you, Mr. Constant.
thank you. The recommendation would be safety being a priority. We recommend reviewing the school district's relocatable buildings as a potential element within the plan.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any opposition to the motion? All right, not seeing any. And I actually forgot to write down the recommendation. Then that motion is approved. Just give me 2 seconds here. All right, so then any additional requests for information that y'all haven't put into the record already? All right, not seeing any. I think it's probably really just a lot of the same, right? I think timeline, again, a lot of the same for the other recommendations we've been talking about. Leads. Should I just write your name down? Okay. And then who from the assembly wants to take lead? Damn. Well, I don't want to voluntold him again. Mr. Cross, did you want to take lead on exploring this idea as well?
Are you talking, which idea was that? Is that the
This is specifically the
relocatables?
relocatables. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy. The first thing I'll do is just go take a visual inspection and I'll come back to you with what I find. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
If I might, Mr. Chair, I just think that both the pallet or any of these modulars and the school district relocatables are in fact the same. It's the same question. And so it's just different tools to solve the problem with the similar mechanism. And so I don't know that it's two, it's one process.
Yes, thanks. I agree. I think this is all wrapped into the same process. Okay.
Oh, sorry. May I add one thing to the request for information?
Sure.
So, and maybe this already exists for these, but specifically for the ALSD relocatables, an itemized list of, so we know there's 56, the square footage of each of them. So because I assume, like we said, there's different sizes, how many exit doors each of them has. And then I don't know if there's any current assessment of condition, good, fair, poor, or whatever that looks like, but maybe just some kind of idea. I think that would be helpful. And also maybe location, if not address, at least, what school they're stored in or things like that, if they're in multiple locations.
And my information was a little old, but we should still verify they're still there.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
Along those lines, I asked if we could see maintenance logs. I mean, I'm sure they must have them, but it would be interesting to be able to have that information.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Okay. We have one more, and this one isn't, we're not going to have to go through all this exercise for this last one. We will just have a discussion, and that is section 8, which is the Complex Behavioral Health Needs Task Force. As I stated earlier, that task force was approved last night at the assembly meeting, so it is officially created. It is going to be, at this moment, co-convened by the chairs of the Health Policy Committee and the Housing and Homelessness Committee, and then looking forward to engaging in partners, and maybe another partner will step up and take the lead on that particular task force. I think the right now is just sort of general discussion, ideas, whatever you want to bring to the table at this meeting regarding that particular task force. We'll open it up for that. And totally fine if we don't have anything, because we did talk about it yesterday. All right, that's fine by me. All right, so then.
Oh, sorry, Felix, I had one note.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
And hopefully this isn't repeating what was discussed yesterday. I still need to catch up on the meeting. But just to emphasize, behavioral health conditions include substance use disorders. And so I know there's a lot of discussion about sober housing and our lack of low barrier shelter. And there's different opinions in the community, whether that's an appropriate use of public funds. But I just want to emphasize that I do believe it is, and that substance use disorders are a behavioral health condition similar to mental health. And there's so many folks with co-occurring disorders that it's not useful to say that there's two separate populations, right? There's a lot of folks who are experiencing multiple issues. And so I just want to emphasize that that is an important part of this work. Thank you.
I think that's true. I work in the field, and I also believe there's an acuity issue that we have to focus on, that we can't solve everybody's problems all at once. And so we have to come up with a method to determine the acuity and the harm of not acting for a certain set of people, and how we make those decisions has to be by professionals who are qualified and can do it legitimately and within the bounds of ADA and the law. But the fact is, it would be great if we could just find housing for all of these people today, but we can't. And so that's the challenge we face, is determining at what level and who and how we're going to set the first set onto a path or keep them in a place as we sort through those details. So I appreciate and agree that behavioral health is health, and that includes substance use and mental health services for people in need. And at the same time, we have to make those difficult calls.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so I think that pretty much ends our discussion on the demobilization plan. We have covered through all the different sections of the plan, and I think we have various leads, various recommendations, and various timelines of work to get done. So it is going to be quite a busy few months. Yes, go ahead, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we move on, I'm wondering where we're at in terms of, you mentioned some possible resolutions on Tuesday that may be laid on the table. And the position where I'm at, just for information, I know we don't vote or debate here, is that I am very interested in the step down approach. And I know that obviously there are some big concerns from the neighbors about maintaining a mass shelter in the area. But obviously for individuals who don't have any options and are looking at 6 to 18 months in terms of wait list, I'm very concerned, particularly about that population. I know we're going to move on in the discussion, so I did just want to convey that I am fully in support of a step down approach and anticipate that who that would include and the numbers would be a point of debate for the body on Tuesday as well. And part of it, to Ms. Zelatel's, the director of the ACEH's point, I mean, obviously for weather and honestly in the hopes of some more time to engage the state to come up with some solutions. So thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think just to circle back to the earlier conversation, assuming ADRC is able to do a lot of work this weekend, the rest of this weekend through the weekend, on Monday, I hope that we get a better picture, and I think that'll guide the discussion that we have on Tuesday. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and move on. Unless I have any objection, I'm actually going to move on. So much on our agenda we're not going to get to today, to the fair housing presentation, which is under new business. I know that's not normal for us to do that, but I would like to actually, I take that back. My apologies. I want to do a quick couple informational updates because those have been on our agenda for a while. So informational update on OCS presentation. So after receiving a request from Member Cross, which was probably like 3 months ago, to have OCS present before this committee, specifically around foster care, I reached out to community partners to try to get a better understanding of the link between foster care and homelessness. And based on my understanding and a cursory review of the data, I have decided that I think it would be appropriate for us to have a discussion at this committee. So I ask you for your patience, Mr. Cross, as that discussion likely won't be happening until May, possibly June. We will see as things progress in this committee. But that is something that I think I would like to have that discussion here. And then regarding the housing study, or excuse me, not housing study, but housing summit. I think we're oh, you want to speak to it? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Thank you. As Mr. Vera was about to say, we're getting close to making some announcements on the trajectory of the housing summit. It looks like it's going to be in fall of this year, but what's going to happen before that is in the early summer, we'll do like we did last year, round 2 of the assembly housing policy work that we did at the library last year, so that new members can get up to speed on where we are, where we've been working. And then over the summer, we'll be building the case and the outcome plan for the summit. And so current trajectory for that will be the fall of this year, early fall.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Constead. Very excited for that work. Okay, so that takes off those 2 agenda items that have been stuck for a while. Now, unless I hear any objection, I'm going to move forward with the fair housing presentation. All right, not seeing any objection. So we will cover the alcohol tax funding of emergency shelter and likely all of the other new business items at a future meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Committee. So my apologies. Okay, so with that, I will ask our fair housing folks to please come up. Yeah, feel free to come up here. And then if we can, which presentation are we going to be starting with?
I'll start with the fair housing.
Okay. Great. So as I always try to do every month, I want to make sure that our agenda has at least one item on it that discusses housing in some fashion. And as some folks may know, April is Fair Housing Month in honor of the passage of the Fair Housing Act in April of 1968, which is a federal law that prohibits discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, color, national origin, religion, and gender. So we have two great organizations here to present on this topic: Alaska Legal Services Corporation and the Eviction Diversion Program from the Alaska Court System. So with that, I'll turn it over to y'all.
Thank you. We'll just talk about the Fair Housing Act very briefly and the kind of protections it provides for folks. Then I just want to give a little info about what Alaska Legal Services does, how we can help people. And then there was a request to talk a little bit about condemnation, tenants' rights regarding condemnation, and regarding habitability issues. Next slide, please. This is just a HUD disclaimer. We can skip that. And so let's talk about the Federal Fair Housing Act briefly. Basically, fair housing is a right for all people to be free from discrimination, and the rental, sale, or financing, or really anything to do with housing. And it's an equal access, equal opportunity rule. Next slide, please. So this is really the heart of fair housing laws. Under the Fair Housing Act, the federal law, discrimination is illegal when someone's being treated differently based on one of these 7 protected classes. If you're being treated differently otherwise, it's possibly not illegal. But under these specific classes, it is illegal. So if you're being treated differently from someone else, another person in your housing, because of your race, that would be illegal discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. So I just want to go through these because there's actually a bit more detail to what it just says. So race, color, national origin, that can include some language issues, religion, gender. Now, gender is pretty broad. Recently, HUD has interpreted gender discrimination as including discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. In addition, under gender discrimination, sexual harassment or discrimination against domestic violence survivors can also potentially be illegal discrimination. Disability is another protected class under the Fair Housing Act. It's very broad, much broader than, say, a definition of disability under Social Security. It includes physical, mental disabilities. It includes addiction to, but not current use of, illegal substances. It includes alcoholism, including current use of alcohol. So you can't be treated differently because of your disability. And finally, under the Federal Fair Housing Act, familial status is protected, which means having minor children in the home. So generally, except for exceptions for senior housing, you can't you can't say, I'm not going to rent to families with kids, for example. Now, this is under the Federal Fair Housing Act. Alaska has a human rights statute. The municipality has an equal rights ordinance. And there are different protected classes under those as well. Age and marital status are protected classes under the municipal ordinance, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity explicitly. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So, I mean, maybe one of the biggest points I'd like to make is that the Fair Housing Act and other fair housing laws are incredibly broad. They cover virtually all housing-related transactions. These are just examples of the kinds of things it covers: renting or buying a house, the terms and conditions. So what's in your lease? How are you being treated once you're renting a place? I won't go into reasonable accommodations or modifications, but those are kind of particular laws that apply to people with disabilities so that they can enjoy their housing the same as people without disabilities. It includes mortgage lending, appraisals, advertising, and new design and construction of multifamily housing. Next slide, please. And part of why the Fair Housing Act is so broad, it doesn't say like landlords violate the Fair Housing Act when they act this particular way. It really says any person or entity who discriminates against a person in their housing is violating the Fair Housing Act. So next slide, please. So here are examples of all the entities that must comply with Fair Housing Act. Some less obvious things like homeowners associations, advertising, media, housing authority. I mean, one relevant group that could be added to this would be government entities of various sorts. When they make decisions related to housing, if those decisions are discriminatory based on a protected class, they could potentially be illegal under the Fair Housing Act. Next slide, please. So just to belabor the point a little bit, it's only illegal discrimination when it's a covered protected class and a covered issue. You're treating someone differently than someone else based on that protected class. I should note that more broadly, even a neutral policy that treats people the same, does not treat people differently based on a protected class, but can have a discriminatory effect, might also be illegal. So an example of that is having a criminal record is not a protected class. However, due to disproportionate involvement with the justice system based on race, such as in Alaska, there's a disproportionate involvement with the justice system for Black folks, for Alaska Native people. Having overly restrictive policies, if a landlord has overly restrictive policies regarding criminal background screening, that can potentially be racial discrimination and can be illegal based on that disparate impact or differential effect, discriminatory effect on people. Next slide, please. So just briefly, for those who don't know, Alaska Legal Services, we're a nonprofit law firm. We provide free legal services to folks, mostly low-income folks. We do generally have income eligibility restrictions. We don't under this fair housing work we do. We can help anybody regardless of income restrictions. Next slide, please. So part of what we do is outreach and education regarding fair housing laws, such as this. But to get maybe a little more into the meat of things, one of the things we do is help people file fair housing complaints with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. They have a whole process for investigating fair housing violations and then forwarding those to the Department of Justice to pursue enforcement action. In addition, when there are sort of fair housing aspects to it, we help with evictions, help people prevent evictions, I should say, and help with suits for injunctive relief and damages. Next slide, please. So very briefly, I know the chair was interested in some things about condemnation. It's not a real area of expertise, but we've kind of run into it here and there. It's governed by municipal ordinances. There are generally notice requirements, and the owner certainly has the right to appeal the condemnation, but the tenant might. That's a little unclear, and I don't know if that's been like litigated, but under the language of the ordinance, it's a little unclear. I guess the main thing I'd want to say is the condemnation is not directly addressed by any of Alaska's landlord tenant statutes or other state laws, but the tenant does have the right under the Landlord Tenant Act to sue for diminution of rental value to a apartment unit they rent when it is not up to standards. Next slide, please. So before you get to the point of condemnation, what can a tenant do to prevent their place from reaching that level of disrepair? Well, if a landlord fails to provide essential services, a tenant has to give written notice and can repair and deduct. There's some other remedies too, but that's the most common one. You know, I withhold my rents and get my plumbing repaired or whatever, so I have running water. There is a mechanism for doing that. Or a tenant can file for injunctive relief and damages. Unfortunately, this is this generally would require the assistance of an attorney. You have to file in superior court. You have to jump through a number of legal hoops to get injunctive relief, to sort of get an order for a landlord to repair something. But it is an option. And finally, a tenant can give a notice demanding repairs and terminating the tenancy in 20 days. So they can essentially break their lease, but that's not always the most useful solution if they don't have access to other housing. And next slide, please. Thank you. That's it. Here's my contact info if you want to follow up on that crash course in fair housing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And just to give a little point of reference, so part of the reason that I asked for the information on condemnation is that a couple of weeks ago, when I was at the Sullivan, I ran into someone who shared that they came to the Sullivan because they were condemned from their housing. That's the only reason that they were at the Sullivan. So thank you for that presentation. All right, next. We can get the next one up. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and do this now. Can I get a motion to extend by 15 minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any opposition to that? So purpose of that, so we're extended to 12:45. Purpose of that extension is to do two things. One, to have the discussion on the job fairs briefly, and then two, to do final audience participation. With that, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Will Walker. I'm with the court's new eviction diversion program, and I'm happy to be here to speak with you about. So the court system received a grant from the National Center for State Courts this past year to start up a new court-based eviction diversion program, which I've been working on. Next slide, please. And so it's a statewide voluntary program. And though it's statewide, we've spent a lot of time focusing on Anchorage. I just ran the numbers yesterday, and 70% of the evictions filed statewide since January 1st of last year have been in Anchorage, which is disproportionate, obviously, to the population of Anchorage relative to the statewide population. Kind of one of the main prongs of the program is encouraging mediation between landlords and tenants as an alternative to the formal eviction court process. And this is available either before or after a case has been filed. We're trying to encourage participation as soon as possible to try to move things upstream when there's more opportunities to reach a resolution that can help everyone. And as part of the program, the court has issued some provisional court rule changes, which I'll get to in a little bit as well. Next slide, please. In addition to kind of the mediation component, I kind of see there as being three major pillars to the program. One is outreach, trying to reach landlords and tenants where they're at, developing relationships with service providers, landlord groups, tenant groups, other stakeholders in the community, as well as court staff and courts across the state. A second pillar is improving the access to legal information. And this was kind of something that we see as important, and is also pursuant to feedback that we received from landlords and landlord attorneys early on in the process. As we see, the better informed that people are about the eviction process, about people's rights and responsibilities under Landlord-Tenant Acts, and through that relationship, kind of the better outcomes there will be, and the better prepared people are for whatever stage in the process, whether there's a mediation, whether there's a hearing, or just through the landlord-tenant relationship. And so trying to develop and improve resources on the court website, and that we make available to landlords and tenants at court. And the third prong is kind of connecting people with community resources. And so as I'm interacting with people who are interested in the program, trying to connect them with available services and resources in the community to help with various other needs that they might have, because many people facing evictions likely have other needs as well. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there are a few provisional rule changes as part of the implementation of the program. Two of these relate to the landlords providing information to the tenants at two different stages of the process that kind of meet these different prongs. So to provide information about the eviction process and what the stage is that they're in and what options the tenant has at those different stages to proceed. And so there's an example of the notice here on the screen for the pre-filing information. And so that goes out by the landlord to the tenant with the notice to quit, which is kind of the beginning of sort of the legal process before it goes to court. And then a similar one goes out from the landlord to the tenant with the complaint and summons once a formal case has been started with the court. And the third requirement as part of this is for tenants or for the landlords to include the tenant's contact information when they start a case. And so that's so that we can reach out to tenants who've had a case started against them so we can try to, again, share legal information, share resources, and talk about the option of mediation, which again is voluntary, and we need both a buy-in from the landlord and the tenant to proceed that way. There's no method of delay through this. It's an optional process for landlords, and they can still pursue an eviction case as they go through the program if they so desire. An additional kind of provisional rule change is removing cases that are closed without a judgment for possession, without an eviction judgment from the public access court view. And so that's so that just having a case started against a tenant isn't held against them for their rental history moving forward. One question we often get is why mediate? Why use mediation? One of the major reasons is it can prevent the negative effects that come with as a result of an eviction. And we know those effects on a tenant, that it's a barrier to rental in the future and to receiving public housing benefits for a time period moving forward as well. But also I think it's beneficial for the community to have fewer evictions. Additionally, it's can help both sides save time and money rather than going through the formal court process, potentially hiring an attorney, paying filing fees and a process server, and kind of going through that process. That's a more kind of formal process, which requires, attendance at court hearings, being able to have a more informal discussion and meeting with the two sides to see if an agreement can be reached that can provide for a win-win outcome and a better outcome for both sides. One thing I like about mediation and other forms of alternative dispute resolution is that it provides for more party autonomy for both sides and enables them to create and explore more creative solutions than would be available just through the court process in letting a judge make the decision for the parties. And it's more likely, I think, we've seen here and in other jurisdictions that when the parties voluntarily enter into an agreement, it's more likely that'll be followed and that for the landlords, they'll have their unit back potentially if there's an agreement to vacate than if it were to go through the formal process. Again, thank you for your time. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to, again, like outreach is an important component of this program. So we'd be happy to do more presentations to service providers or members of the community.
Great, thank you so much. And just like the prior presentation, I think one of the reasons why I wanted to have this presentation, aside it from being Fair Housing Month, is that again, as I go to the Sullivan, I continue to see people who are at the Sullivan because they were evicted. And so, as I like to say, there are 1,000 ways why someone might become homeless at some point and end up at the Sullivan. Yeah, go ahead.
That's definitely an important perspective to have, but at the same time, we have to see the other side as well. I recently went through with a company that I am engaged with an eviction that had to happen because the building was taken over by 40 people and they turned on the faucets and ran them for 2 months at 50,000 gallons a month and literally started destroying the place. And so it's important to recognize the fair housing aspects, and it's important to understand that eviction sometimes is the right thing. And so somewhere between those 2 points is the charted course we have to follow. And so I'm not here to speak for evictions, but I just want to make sure people understand that this area of the law is ripe because it's a problem we've had forever.
Thanks. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thanks to both of you for the work that you do and for your presentations. My first question was actually answered already, which was how these mediated cases are treated in court view. So I'm happy to see that that those are not published if they are resolved, because I think that is important. It is a big stigma. Certainly, it's helpful for employers and things to see background on folks, but the downside is that it creates those stigmas. So I'm glad to hear that. Question for the Legal Services Corporation. So I understand you guys obviously have limited funding. I'm glad to see this grant that you have from HUD, from Housing and Urban Development. I was just curious how that grant has been able to supplement your work in housing. And then my other question is, in terms of all of the cases you see, what general percent are housing related in Anchorage or statewide?
Sure. Thank you. I would say, so it's actually helped quite a bit because it gives us a dedicated space to work on housing. You know, our funding is constantly shifting, and sometimes that funding has strings attached. Like this funding, it's solely for housing and solely for fair housing. So what happens, not to get into the weeds, cases come in regarding any kind of housing, we kind of vet them to see if there are fair housing aspects, and then we have a dedicated team to kind of working on those. If they're not fair housing, it's going to kind of depend on what other kinds of resources are out there. I would say generally, you know, housing is probably a good quarter of what we deal with, but that's probably different right now because we've had a huge influx regarding the SNAP food stamp cases. We've been just getting hundreds and hundreds of those within the last 6 months now. So, I mean, that's kind of overwhelmed everything and sucked up a lot of our resources.
Yeah, thanks. And just to reiterate what you said, the fair housing work is a subset of all of the housing related cases that you deal with, including evictions. Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, not seeing any other discussion. Thank you both so much. So we're going to go ahead and then move on to the discussions on the job fairs, and then we'll go to final audience participation. So a member requested this topic be added to our agenda, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Volan to speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, we have Director of Parks and Rec here, Mike Braniff, who helped coordinate some of these job fairs in an effort to hire people experiencing homeless and give them an opportunity for work. And so if it's okay with you, I'd like for Mike to give a report.
Yes, thank you. And I'll give just a very brief recap so we kind of understand the lay of the land. Parks and Rec depends on being able to hire each season at the beginning of the summer, roughly 150 people to do a lot of outdoor work. And this is spread across, and a little indoor work too, but this is spread across 7 different divisions. But we depend on being able to assemble a seasonal workforce really quickly. That's pretty significant in size. We began to experience challenges doing this in 2021. This is not unique to us. This is the entire labor market, not only in the state or in Anchorage, but in the country as well. And we really started to experience the challenges in 2022, so much so that it began to affect our ability to deliver services as we always had. 2023 looks even more challenging as we look at the numbers where we're at this point in the year. That said, we're very appreciative of HR and in particular Deputy Director Jared Goker, as he had identified midwinter 2 problems. One, Parks and Rec's ability to hire as many folks as we need for the season, as well as the fact that there are folks living in places such as the guest house and housing that depend on having an income so that they can pay a portion of their rent. And so he really connected a couple things and tried to bring it all together in a way where we're helping people that need to work for that reason, and our department, who in particular needs a lot of folks to mow grass and any number of tasks. And so just a brief recap of the numbers. we held a job fair at the Sullivan Arena, and the next day we had one as well at the guest house housing facility, or former guest house. We also shuttled people from the Aviator to attend either job fair if we chose. We had 101 total interested individuals or applicants on site through kind of an expedited or assembly line process. HR was able to extend 41 conditional offers to those individuals. But then as they came back and began to work through those groups, that group of 41 was whittled down quite a bit, and we've been able to onboard and employ 6 individuals so far, and it's up in the air. 1 to perhaps 3 more will be able to join the ranks or join the team. And I think the 2 most common things that eliminated individuals from being eligible for employment were criminal background history. That was the most significant, as well as not having a driver's license, which is a PD requirement of all of the positions that we're looking to hire people for. And so that's a brief recap of it. And I don't know, Assemblymember Voland, if it's helpful for you, for me to just share my thoughts on what potential solutions could be at this point, or
if it's okay with the chair. Yep, go ahead.
Sure. And so as we worked through this and identified some of the challenges, these are range 6 positions for the most part, these seasonal positions that we're looking to hire folks for within the L71 contract and that structure that's created. And one potential solution that was posed to us, this actually came from the union, is to create a range 5 position. And the difference between that and range 6 is it doesn't require a driver's license. We send essentially what we do is we send crews out in teams of 3 or 4 individuals to parks to mow and to clean, care for assets. And not everybody needs to be able to drive. A lot of folks can be passengers and be just as effective. And then they would have the potential, I would think or hope to, if they are able to get a driver's license, they could move up to range 6, and that would be a bump in pay and an incentive to do so. We also wondered if the threshold could be relaxed for non-regular employees. In the instance, and I'm not an expert in this, and I need to be a little careful speaking to it, but in the instance of a regular employee, we consider their job here with the municipality their property. And in order to take that job away from them, in a certain sense, we're taking away that property. However, that does not exist, to my understanding, in the case of a seasonal employee. This is an employee who's able to work for no more than a 6-month term and is essentially in an unbenefited position with the traditional benefits package. And so, because the ability to separate employment with folks in a seasonal position is easier, or there's a lower threshold, I thought perhaps some of that criteria could be relaxed as well. And I think ultimately, one of the biggest challenges for us is we're in the middle of contracts. We're in the middle of collectively bargained labor agreements. In particular, our department has 2 large groups. One is L71. These are almost all of the folks who are doing outdoor work for us: parks maintenance, horticulture, healthy spaces. It's about a 100-person work group in the summertime, as well as AMEA, which is most everybody on the rec side or in our planning team or in City Hall. I think in the past 18 to 24 months, we've seen that the most flexible and adaptable and responsive employers have been able to weather these changes in the labor market the best. And I think that somewhat speaks to the challenge of being in the middle of an agreement that's fairly static. In the past, I think we've paid about 20% above market to these seasonal employees who we would employ, and that allowed us to attract a large group of people in a relatively short amount of time. And I think where we've landed now is we pay at market at best and potentially 10% below market when most of our positions start at $18 an hour. I think we see a lot of $20 an hour plus opportunities for people that are essentially, entry level into the labor market in any number of fields. So.
Well, thank you for that report. I think it was really innovative thinking, and the sort of glass half full, glass half empty. I think the glass half full is that although that number was whittled down, like you said, it's cause for celebration that you were able to hire 6 people. That's pretty awesome. So I think maybe, Chair, on that, exploring the concept of the that new designation, is that something that we could refer to like the Community and Economic Development Committee if they were willing to take that up? Or, I think it's in line with the resolution that we just passed, exploring those, essentially how can we make it easier to more quickly build our workforce? And if we're able to create opportunity for people who really need it, I think that would be a good thing to do. So thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. And the Muni also has some experience, which ended not so well in the past, but could be thought through again, of working with some providers in the community that could provide contracted workforce. The challenges, of course, are the insurance, how they're trained, what they're doing, but there might be ways to get people who have kind of challenges to their skill set to be able to perform some services. But in my perspective, to do that, it has to be in compliance with the local 71 labor practices, which I think is fine. I think it could be squared to where we can come up with a multi-pronged approach, but certainly at this time we need workers for the Muni.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question. So once some of these workers finish their summertime temporary position, do they occasionally prove themselves good enough to where you think that they could qualify for a year-round position and they actually get hired for a permanent position? Does that occasionally happen? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's a good one. In the summertime, we employ a large number of summer seasonal employees. In the winter, we employ a smaller number. It might be 25% of that group as winter seasonal employees. We're still working throughout the year, providing services to the public, and we need a workforce. And these seasonal employees are on top of our regular full-time benefited employees, which is a smaller overall work group than the seasonals in the summertime anyhow. But there certainly is an opportunity for the top performers to find a winter seasonal job as well. Those are typically fairly competed for, and we haven't had these same challenges in the winter, at least not yet. But there's opportunity. Ultimately, everybody would like to move past the seasonal model and get on full time and have a benefits package.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, so I need to move us on to final audience participation. Thank you so much. I think we're gonna have time to squeeze in maybe 2 individuals, depending on how long folks speak. So who would like to participate? All right, so I see 2 folks right there. You're gonna be it. So if you wanna please come up, we'll set you up for a mic. I'll set the timer for 3 minutes. Oh, all right. Then we'll do 3. We'll just make it work. Okay. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Joe Wood. I live directly across the street from the Sullivan. I hear all this talk about, building these modulars or, getting them from the school district and whatnot. But how are you going to plumb them? How are you going to provide electricity, water? And then when you move them, you got to replumb them again. So all we're going to do is just spend endless amount of money when we have buildings that you've bought and leased. But you're not occupying them. You're not providing job skills. So what you give them these houses, now they don't have a job skill, so when the funding runs out, they're right back out in the street. How's this work? You're just bilking us with money. I don't get it. You know, we all got these great ideas, but you're not thinking in the long term. Eventually the money's going to run out. They're going to end up back on the street without job skills. You need to provide job skills. Last I knew, the welfare to work program was not rescinded. You know, you have to give them some tough love. If you want assistance, you need to work for it. You know, obviously the ones who are disabled, whether, you know, behaviorally or physically, you know, they're excluded. You know, they should be the priority for housing, you know, individual housing. But the people, you know, who are able to work should be put in the welfare to work program. It's real simple. They need job skills. Housing them is not going to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks. My name's Thea Agnew-Bemben. I'm here wearing two different hats. One is someone who's worked with many of you and many of the people who care about. I've worked with Kathleen and Monica and lots of other folks for many years around all sorts of issues related to homelessness, behavioral health, and related issues. And then I'm also one of the community co-chairs, along with Pastor May, who was here earlier, of the newly formed Equity Committee of the Assembly. And our committee identified homelessness and housing as one of the priority areas for us for this year as part of basic needs, in part because of the kind of extraordinary disparities that exist amongst our homeless population. For example, 50% of people experiencing homelessness have a disability. So I'm wearing both of those hats. Part of what I wanted to do was just kind of acknowledge that it feels like we're at a low point because of where things are at with the Sullivan. But I just wanted to also remind us that we have been working on this together and we've actually made tremendous progress. I worked on the 2018 Anchored Home Plan. I also wanted to just maybe remind the committee and Assemblymember Cross that we also have a Anchorage Youth and Young Adult Homelessness Plan, which I worked on right before the Anchored Home Plan. They both have the same vision, which is to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time for people in Anchorage. And I think even though there's been lots of ups and downs, we really have come together around a strategy that we just didn't have before. And even the conversation that you've all had today, where we're thinking out of the box, we're trying to bring funding together, we're acknowledging that people have disabilities, that behavioral health is a disability in certain cases. All of that is pretty new. That isn't what we used to do. So we also have funders at the table. We've had a lot of private funding. I also worked on the Third Avenue plan, which one of the recommendations was the Third Avenue Navigation Center. That was a robust public process. I just want to correct a statement that was made earlier. And that also identified the need for distributed shelter across the community. One of the other things I've spent a lot of time working on over my career is behavioral health. I'm part of the team working with the trust and the state and many Anchorage partners to develop Crisis Now across the state, which is developing new behavioral health crisis services. And that has partly come online here in Anchorage. More is to come in the next few months. And I guess what I want to say is that we've made a lot of progress with veterans, with family, with youth. We've really solved a lot of those gaps. And the folks that we're concentrating on right now are the hardest to serve. They're single adults. There's many experiences of trauma, long-term homelessness, and it just takes a long time to sort this out. Our entire state does not serve well people who have multiple complex issues. And that's who's living at the Sullivan. So we need to just take our time. Mostly what I want to say is we cannot just shut the door and put all of these folks, all of our neighbors out on the street. I just really hope that the Assembly changes course and doesn't do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Shantae. I am a doctorally trained nurse practitioner, dual board certified, and adult gerontology as well as psychiatric mental health. And I currently am employed with Traces doing their homeless transitional program, Home for Good. And I hear a lot of great ideas, but I hear like a crucial link that's missing. When are you guys bringing in healthcare providers? When are you bringing in the people who can actually triage these 174 people and tell you who's going to be appropriate for your relocatables? I can tell you, if you put certain people that are in the Sullivan right now in those relocatables, they are going to burn them down. There are some people in there that are currently not appropriate for housing because of their untreated SMI and their SUD. I walk in there to see some of my patients, and I'm flooded by people who just want me to look at their rash, look at their wound. Where is the healthcare being brought into this? Housing is a form of healthcare. Obviously, it gives them time to recover. It gives them time to rest, gives your body a chance to rest. But there's a healthcare component missing here. Where are the healthcare providers, not the case managers that can help us do our part, but where's the bringing in of us? I know people that want to help. They don't know how. They don't know how to reach, where is that being thought about? Eviction. I have clients, if you put them in apartments, we're going to run those landlords that want to be a part of this away, because more than likely they're not being properly screened at the beginning to be, hey, this is someone that can live with a roommate. This is someone that can live on their own in a box that reminds them of trauma when they were a child and put in a box. You have to start at the beginning, starting while they're in the Sullivan, incorporating that comprehensive healthcare component, not just the SUD, the mental health, but also the health care. Because we're talking about cost. To reduce cost, we have to start at the beginning, not once they're out in the community, because we're seeing this revolving cycle of in and out, in and out, in and out. I know who you're talking about at the Sullivan. They are severely mentally impaired. We're talking schizophrenia, bipolar. We're talking untreated major depressive disorder, PTSD, on top of methamphetamine dependency, alcohol dependency, co-occurring dependencies, as well as medical problems. And getting them appointments is not always as easy as going to A&MC. We have a clinic that just closed that put thousands of insured clients without providers. So that booked us out for I can't get my patient a PCP provider. 3 months. I had a patient almost miss his appointment yesterday, and they were going to push him out to June. And this is someone that we think possibly has a chronic terminal illness. I had to beg to get him an appointment this week to not be pushed out till June. Please, please, please do not forget to incorporate the medical. We can triage, we can help you determine who's appropriate and who's not for these relocatables and these housing placements, so these people can have an easier job and they can have a chance at not returning to the Sullivan. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we are adjourned.